coming to Montreal and for this friendly talk, actually. And Mr. Zaidi is the director of publication at the Transformative Studies Institute, and he's vice president of the Southeast European Study Association, and he's an assistant professor at Humanities at State University of New York in Canada. He has a master's degree in English literature from Peshawar University and a master's degree in Spanish literature from Queen College, City University of New York, and a PhD in comparative literature from University of Rochester. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And
well, thank you for your kind introduction here. My paper, I want you all to know, is not really a scholarly presentation. It's really a gathering of friends. The title, the old title was Rediscovering Thomas Paine and the Sacred Text of Nature. My new title is A New Age of Reason. And in this article, I talk about Thomas Paine, who was one of the fathers of American democracy. He believed in social and economic equality, a guaranteed minimum income for all citizens of the United States. He also believed in a new reconception of religion, that religion is not a question of what language, what sacred text we believe in, but how God speaks to us. How does God speak to us? How do we know God? And he believed, as many deists, as many pantheists do, that God doesn't speak to us in human language, but through the language of nature. That does not mean that the Bible or the Quran are not valid as divine revelation, only that these sacred texts draw attention away from themselves. And this is what I will seek to prove in my paper. As I say, it is a synthesis of thought. There's nothing in there that's mine. Throughout this talk, I'm going to be saying quote, unquote, because I'm reading other people's words. Kabir, Hafiz, Thomas Paine, Aboriginal cultures, ancient cultures, ancestral cultures. I believe these cultures are not a thing of the past, but they are modern. They speak to us now. They speak to us today. As I'm about to speak to you, as I'm about to read to you, out west in the United States, there are hundreds of forest fires burning. And these forest fires are burning because of our neglect of the environment, because we use fossil fuels, because we cannot reconceive of ways to produce energy. We, the United States, that is, we are 1/25th of the world's population, and we use 1/3 of its energy. 1/3 of the energy for a country that is barely 1/25th of the world's population. Why do we need so much? Well, we don't need that much. We use it because we can. But there are alternatives to the usage of these fuels. There's geothermal energy. We can use tidal power, the power of the waves we can use. We can use solar energy. We can use wind power. But right now, in my country, in the United States, we use less than 1% of our energy. Less than 1% comes from alternative sources of energy, from solar, from wind, from geothermal. And here in Canada, here's the issue of the tar sands in Alberta. This particularly destructive form, energy-intensive use of oil. I believe that in order to survive, we must redefine what is sacred. I happen to believe that there is no division between the living and the non-living. If you take a virus, for example, it's defined as something that is not alive. It is inert. It doesn't move. It will stay dormant like a crystal for centuries. But if you put a virus inside a living organism, it springs to life. It becomes life. So what is the difference? What is the divine line between life and non-life, between living and non-living. My view is that if we were really to see the world as it is, the universe, the world is alive. And we are, in a cosmic sense, no more than, we think of ourselves as something distinct from the non-living, but we're actually part of it. It comes to us in our dreams, in what we think of as a non-reality. But the Aboriginal, the ancestral cultures taught us that there's another way of seeing the world. They believe that you can remember the future, that memory directed to the past is memory, but memory directed to the future is prophecy. We can shape the future. We can create the future. So this talk, what I'm going to read right now, is, as I said, a gathering of friends, a compendium of voices, but it is also a shaping of the future. So let me get to it now. There is no better time in this age of global warming and mass extinction of species to rediscover the liberating thought of Thomas Paine, which recalls that of mystics and poets of many ancient cultures. In his iconoclastic The Age of Reason, published in 1794, Paine transfers the locus of the sacred from religious texts to the material book of nature, since, quote, "It is in this word, which no human invention can counterfeit or alter, that God speaketh universally to man," unquote. With these words, Paine anticipates the emergent romanticism of our times, in his times, by envisioning religion as an imaginative force that restores us to a living universe. Paine became a leading figure of the American Revolution after he denounced the institution of monarchy and King George III in Common Sense, published in 1776. In that pamphlet, Paine advocated the independence of the United States, the American colonies, while underscoring the universality of the ideas therein. Shortly after publishing a defense of the French Revolution in Rights of Man, published between 1791 and 1792, Paine went to France, where he was granted honorary citizenship and elected to the National Assembly. During the Reign of Terror, Paine spent a year in prison and barely escaped execution. It was during that period that he wrote The Age of Reason, in which he denies the status of the Bible as divine revelation. Paine argues that human language could never be, quote, "a means of unchangeable and universal information," unquote, since language is a construct whose meaning is contested and in constant flux. It is in nature that one glimpses the divine. Quote, "It is only in the creation that all our ideas and conceptions of a word of God can unite. The creation speaketh a universal language, independently of human speech or human language. It is an everlasting original, ever existing, in which every man can read, cannot be forged, it cannot be counterfeited, it cannot be lost, cannot be altered, it cannot be suppressed. It does not depend on the will of man whether it be published or not. It publishes itself from one end of the earth to the other. It preaches to all nations and to all worlds, and this word of God reveals to man all that is necessary to know of God," unquote. This spiritual shift has profound implications. For if the creation is indeed the word of God, How could one pollute the lakes and rivers? How could one chop down forests for timber or remove mountain tops for mining? How could one butcher animals for food or sport? Paine rejects the wrathful deity of the Old Testament, recognizing in his stead a merciful and humble God who is indistinguishable from creation, who the saints and poets such as Cafelitt recognize. Quote, God is the tree in the forest that allows itself to die and will not defend itself in front of those with the axe, not wanting to cause them shame. Unquote. Paine foresaw that his views on religion and God would prove controversial, particularly his challenge to biblical authority. In The Age of Reason, Paine explains that he had reserved the writing of that book for old age. Indeed, after its publication, clerics and politicians slandered Paine so much that barely half a dozen people, less than the number of people in this room, attended Paine's funeral in 1809. An English reformer, William Cobbett, disinterred Paine's remains and transported them to England. Paine's body was stored in an attic and then disappeared after Cobbett's death in 1835. A famous nursery rhyme conveys the complete neglect that befell Paine. Quote, poor Tom, there he lies, nobody laughs and nobody cries. Where he has gone or how he fares, nobody knows and nobody cares. Unquote. Nonetheless, Paine helped lay the foundations of religious pluralism and tolerance in the United States. The Age of Reason continues to provide a moral basis and an intellectual foundation for the separation of church and state. Even now, Paine's syncretic thought undermines the notion, currently in vogue, that religions are doomed to an endless conflict. Paine despised petty creeds that condemn the believers of other faiths to hellfire, preferring the free exchange of ideas to coercion. Paine summed up his creed as follows, quote, I believe in one God and no more, and I hope for happiness beyond this life. I believe in the equality of man, and I believe that religious duties consist in doing justice, loving mercy, and endeavoring to make our fellow creatures happy, unquote. These ethical precepts are shared by believers of many faiths. Paine rejected religions that monopolize truth, preferring in their stead a direct and personal experience of God. Quote, I do not believe in the creed professed by the Jewish church, by the Roman church, by the Greek church, by the Turkish church, by the Protestant church, nor by any church that I know of. My mind is my own church. In this fashion, Paine implies that we all reflect the divine, however dimly or brightly. Paine wanted a revolution in religion, namely, quote, a return to the pure, unmixed, and unadulterated belief in one God. This return to origins would synthesize monotheistic religions into a single belief system that seeks an unmediated intuition of the divine. Paine believed that God could be understood through the application of reason to the natural world rather than through miraculous tales. He sensed unseen worlds, both diminutive and immense, and was humbled by the knowledge that our species is but one of millions on Earth. For Paine, science and religion could never be at odds. For the laws of the physical universe enclose the mystery of God. Jack Fruchtman points out that although he is generally regarded as a deist, Paine might properly be regarded as a pantheist. since he believed that God inheres in the creation itself. Paine's cosmic vision recalls ancient belief systems such as that of the classic Chinese, who, as Roger Ames observes, quote, believed that the power of creativity resides in the world itself, and that the order and regularity of this world evidences is not derived from or imposed upon it by some independent activating power, but inheres in the world. Change and continuity are equally real. The world, then, is the efficient cause of itself. It is resolutely dynamic, autogenerative, self-organizing, in a real sense, alive. Unquote. Although he found the writing of the apostles in the New Testament more suited to that of a cloistered monk than, quote, to any man breathing in the open air of the creation, unquote, Paine nonetheless cited a passage from Matthew 6:28, which erases the illusory dividing line between the human and the natural worlds. Quote, behold the lilies of the field. They toil not, neither do they spin. This passage situates the sacred in an image of nature, much like this verse of Muhammad Iqbal. Quote, the mountains, the sea, the setting of the sun. There I saw Allah without his veil, unquote. Joseph Sittler comments that the word behold lies upon that which is beheld in a kind of tenderness, which suggests that things in themselves have their own wondrous authenticity and integrity, unquote. Despite Paine's disdain for that book, the Old Testament nonetheless affirms the primacy of nature, as in Job 12, quote, but ask the beasts, and they will teach you, the birds of the sky, they will tell you, or speak to the earth, it will teach you, the fish of the sea, they will inform you. Who among all these do not know that the hand of the Lord has done this? In his hand is every living soul and the breath of all mankind, unquote. Although he was skeptical towards all religious texts, Paine limited his discussion in the Age of Reason to the Bible, since Christianity was the dominant religion in the United States. And yet other religious texts concur with Paine's belief in nature as a source of inspiration and divine revelation. The Quran in Surah 22:18 queries, quote, hast thou not seen that unto Allah payeth adoration whosoever is in the heavens and whosoever is in the earth and the sun and the moon and the stars, the hills and the trees and the beasts and the many of mankind, unquote. As Shabir Akhtar notes, quote, the Quran constantly emphasizes the religious significance of the created natural order. Indeed, it contains 10 times as many verses about the signs, ayat, than it does about religious law. A particularly surprising circumstance in view of Islam's justified reputation as a law-centered faith. Allah reveals himself through nature. The divine portents are not typically in the form of miraculous intervention, but rather are found in the mood of the seasons, the tempers of natural forces, and the pregnant silence of the empty space. And here I added a little footnote to my essay. And says that Hafiz is among those who see these portents, reminding us that, quote, God courts us with the beauty of this world, unquote. The Islam of the Quran and Hafiz and Kabir contradicts the grim and coercive Islam of Saudi monarchs and the Taliban, who have reduced Islam to little more than sundry prohibitions and punishments. as if Islam were defined solely by what Muslims ought not to be. It would be like trying to define a human being by saying that a human is not a dog, an ant, or a tree. The Quran displaces humanity from the center of the creation, as in Surah 40:57. Quote, "Assuredly, the creation of the heavens and the earth is greater than the creation of humankind. Yet most people understand it not." Unquote. Indigenous cultures in the Americas also widen the scope of the sacred to encompass nature. Catherine Albanese notes the abundance of indigenous folk tales in which animals and humans shift shapes and melt into their mystical doubles in a sacred universe. Here I just want to add, this is not part of my essay, but in the Native American cultures, people believe that everyone had a double in this world, a messenger from the beyond. And it could be an eagle, it could be a cat, it could be a dog, it could be an eagle. But in a moment of danger, of need, you could appeal to this mystical double. It will come to your assistance. It will give you a sign. It will tell you what to do. Some Christian thinkers in the American colonies also perceive the divine in nature. Despite his Calvinist obsession with personal evil and original sin, quote, "Whenever I look into my heart and take a deep view of my wickedness, it looks like an abyss infinitely deeper than hell," unquote. Despite his obsession, Jonathan Edwards, the 18th century theologian from New England, sensed God's majesty in nature. Quote, "When we behold the light and brightness of the sun, the golden edges of an evening cloud, or the beauteous rainbow, when we behold the adumbrations of his glory and goodness, and in the blue sky of his mildness and in his gentleness," unquote. The ideas of the Enlightenment which Paine introduced to the United States remain, even today, a blueprint for a better world. In Agrarian Justice, published in 1795, Paine proposed a guaranteed minimum wage for landless citizens. Needless to say, this idea never took hold in the United States, where the rich continue to accumulate excessive wealth, and where corporate power continues to corrupt politics and degrade labor and environmental standards. Paine's religious thought beckons amidst ecological crisis. The failure of the 2009 Copenhagen summit to compel nations to reduce greenhouse emissions only redoubles the need to free the world from the corporate death grip. In a world seemingly condemned to endless war and destruction, in which basic human needs remain unmet, the time has come to conceive the human as inseparable from the natural world. We have the example of Prakow Pitak, who revived a forest conservation movement in Thailand when he ordained a large tree as a monk and wrapped a saffron robe around it. The tree ordination ceremony underscores the grim fact that deforestation causes 20% of atmospheric greenhouse gases. Such ceremonies are needed to fulfill Paine's prophecy in Common Sense. Quote, "We have it in our power to begin the world over again," unquote. In more than 400 coastal areas, fertilizer and pollution have depleted oxygen to the point where fish can no longer survive. According to a 2006 estimate by the United Nations Environment Program, each square of ocean contains about 46,000 pieces of plastic debris, which caused the deaths of more than 1 million seabirds and 100,000 marine animals each year. Carbon dioxide emissions have increased the acidity of the oceans by 30%, disrupting the web of life. The levels of rivers have dropped significantly over the past 50 years as glaciers melt due to global warming. The melting glaciers forebode more than a loss of water for irrigation and drinking. For instance, every 15% loss of the Greenland ice sheet will cause ocean levels to rise by 1 meter, which would inundate 14,000 square miles of land in the United States alone. Thomas Paine concludes that it is time, quote, to cease imposing our mechanistic patterns on the biological processes of the earth, to resist the impulse to control, to command, to force, to oppress, to begin quite humbly to follow the guidance of the larger community on which all life depends. Our fulfillment is not in isolated human grandeur, but in our intimacy with the larger earth community, for this is also the larger dimension of our being. On Barry's, unquote, on Barry's advice depends our very survival. Air pollution causes the deaths of 2.4 million people a year, according to an estimate by the World Health Organization. A recent study estimates that 24 billion pounds of toxins are released into the environment each year in the United States alone, causing development disabilities and neurological impairment in over 360,000 children in the United States. What would Paine have thought of the present defiling of the sacred book of nature? Possibly he would have understood that the ecological crisis will not be solved by appeals for individual self-transformation, but by abolishing capitalism, a destructive economic system that Edward Abbey aptly compares to the cancer cell, which destroys its host in pursuit of unlimited growth. Corporate greed and destructive consumption threaten the survival of indigenous people worldwide. In 2002, the Uwa people forced Occidental Petroleum to withdraw from their lands in Colombia despite military repression and the murder of indigenous activists. Shortly afterwards, the Uwa traditional authorities issued a statement that reads in part, quote, "We all belong to the divine creation, and as such, we deserve respect. Mother Earth, despite being violated, continues to silently feed and sustain us. She speaks, but very few listen to her voice. She cries out insistently, but everything continues the same. The money king is only an illusion. Capitalism is blind and barbaric. It buys consciences, governments, peoples, and nations. It poisons the water. It destroys everything. And to the Uwa, it says that we are crazy. But we want to continue to be crazy if it means we can continue to exist on our dear Mother Earth." Unquote. There is a growing realization that our crisis is more spiritual than environmental. As Leighton Caldwell points out, quote, "The environmental crisis is an outward manifestation of a crisis of mind and spirit. There could be no greater misconception of its meaning than to believe it to be concerned only with endangered wildlife, human-made ugliness, and pollution. These are part of it. But more importantly, the crisis is concerned with the creatures we are and what we must become in order to survive. Unquote. The Bible contradicts the notion that the world was made for the sole benefit and pleasure of humanity. Leviticus 25:23 reads, quote, "The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine, for ye are strangers and sojourners with me," unquote. If we were to see the earth as if for the first time, we would regard its creatures as cherished companions. Verse 638 of the Quran situates us in the natural world. Quote, "There is not an animal that lives on earth, not a being that flies on its wings, but forms part of communities like you," unquote. We would do well to retrieve the ancestral memory of peoples who preserve their bonds with the sacred. For as Barry notes, quote, "We have lost our sense of courtesy towards the earth and its inhabitants, our sense of gratitude, our willingness to recognize the sacred character of habitat, our capacity for the awesome, the numinous quality of every earthly reality," unquote. The Mohawk Nation begins its meeting with a Thanksgiving address, in which the Mohawks greet and thank in turn the earth, plants, waters, trees, animals, winds, thunder, sun, moon, stars, and the four spirits known as the sky dwellers. Each invocation concludes with these words, quote, "Now our minds are one," unquote. Paine addresses the sense of oneness with all creation. Quote, "Do we want to contemplate his power? We see it in the immensity of creation. Do we want to contemplate his wisdom? We see it in the unchangeable order by which the incomprehensible whole is governed. Do we want to contemplate his beneficence? We see it in the abundance with which he fills the earth. Do we want to contemplate his mercy? We see it in his not withholding that abundance even from the unthankful. In fine, do we want to know what God is? Search not the book called the Scripture, which any human hand might make, but the Scripture called the creation." Unquote. These words echo the conviction of St. John of Damascus, one of the last church fathers, that, quote, "The whole earth is a living icon of the face of God," unquote. Paine's most lasting legacy would be for us to harness the world's spiritual heritage for ecological transformation. The time has come for an ecumenical movement that rises to the defense of a world that is wondrously alive and which heeds Paine's famous words from the Rights of Man. Quote, "My country is the world, and to do good is my religion," unquote. So, that was my talk, and I open this to discussion. Vous pouvez toujours parler en français, c'est le Québec, et je me souviens aussi, so feel free to speak in English, French, or even Farsi. Someone will translate for me. I hope I did not read too fast. I hope the language was clear.
Beautiful.
No one would publish this. This essay got many rejections, but in the end, I said what was in my heart, and I felt that I gathered all these different thinkers, like good friends, like I'm gathering you all today. You all have something to say. So did Hafiz, so did Thomas Paine, so did Kabir, they all had something to say. So I brought them together like a gathering of friends. tea, you know. So, thank you. So any shower of stones at least?
The notion of religion, when we come to Aboriginals who use culture,
Yes.
we have come now to distinguish between religion as organized religion and spirituality. We seem to be again using both, we can say all three of them at the same level, which by extension you want to put a religious value or attachment or scale to the nature in order for us to consider it. So I wonder if those distinctions are valid that we have come to make these days.
I think we all have a tendency, I think we will all agree that what we believe is religion, what other people believe, those are superstitions. It's true that when we talk about Aboriginal people, we talk about their superstitions, we talk about their beliefs, but we don't really invest them with the same importance that we give to our own religions, to the monotheistic religions, because these are more recent, they're seemingly more authoritative. I have come to believe that these ancient cultures, they're really not ancient, they're really quite modern in what they express. There's a deeper understanding of religion. Some of their beliefs are more in concordance, more in agreement with modern science than modern religions. I'll give you an example. The creation of the earth. When you read the Popol Vuh, it's an ancient text of the Mayans. When they talk about emptiness, how the world came into being, they talk about a pregnant emptiness. It seems to be empty, but it's really not empty. There's no such thing as emptiness, as nothing. Even emptiness has a form, a shape, a being. And that is more in agreement with modern science. That space is shaped, that space is not empty as we think. I don't know if I've answered the question or if I addressed it correctly, but...
No, I think perhaps I misspoke my question, because that wasn't really the essence of what I was trying to come out with. That when we talk about religion, what at the time of Paine, when we were talking about religion, it was one school of belief in organized religion.
Yeah.
Whereas in time, we have come to separate the spirituality, which the natives have, and organized religion.
Yes.
And that's why in some of the citations, the people that you have cited, they have used I see the God.
Yes.
That means each one of us see our own God in the nature.
Yes.
Whereas organized religion imposes one God for everyone. That's, I think, is where the difference comes between the spirituality, the aboriginals, the natives, and the organized religion of the Paine side.
A lot of organized religion, I think you know this, they believe that they have the absolute truth and everyone else is wrong. There's varying degrees of acceptance. Some will, for example, Islam will accept the Bible as divine revelation. They will talk about Ehle Kitab. But in fact, they tend to exclude other perceptions, other gods. And God is just a word. What is God? When we say I believe in God, what does that mean? What exactly does it mean? When we talk about the 99 attributes of God, God the merciful, when we talk about Ar-Rahman, when we talk about Ar-Rahim, when we talk about the attributes of God, what do we mean? These are human qualities. We can't be attributing human qualities to God, and yet we do. But ultimately, God is beyond our understanding, and it's only these human qualities that can point the way to what might be an incomplete, some would say, an unveiling of God, a sense of God, an intimation, an imminence of a revelation that never quite happens. It's about to happen, you're about to see God, but you never quite do. There are moments when it seems like the life is about to reveal its meaning. When we're young, particularly, I don't know if you ever had this feeling in a dream, for example. But then things are veiled again. The mist returns, and we're sunk again in confusion, ignorance, longing. But I think that these different thinkers, they're all pointing to the same thing. They're all trying to tell us that God does speak to us, that we should understand that divine revelation is in this very moment. It's happening now in this room. It's camouflaged, it's hidden, the sacred, it's not in our everyday experience. It may be veiled from us, but it's nonetheless there. What we need right now is a new way of seeing one another, relating to the world. And in this way of seeing, in this way of listening to God speak, we can solve our spiritual, ecological, and political problems. The money king is an illusion, that's what they do. And yet, there's another logic. There's a mechanistic logic. The logic that we are competitors, that there's a legalistic, and so there are two competing beings in us. There's a utilitarian, prosaic, practical view of nature. And yet there's also a sacred, wondrous, innocent, childlike apprehension of nature. A child, we like to think of them as less wise, but they see things without preconceived notions. And I think that when you see something without a preconceived notion, you see things as they really are. I'll give you an example. The Guarani in Paraguay. They were an Aboriginal people. And when the Spaniards came, they brought paper with them. They brought a pen and paper. So the Guarani looked at this paper and said, "What is this for? What is this? What is this?" And the Spanish tried to explain what this was. They said, "This is to send our thoughts to those who are far away." So the Guarani gave paper a name in their own language, and they called it skin of God. Because you know that when you touch something, when I touch this table, my skin transmits this sensation to my brain. And this is what paper is. It transmits our thoughts to those who are far away. It makes people on the internet, or reading a journal, or reading a copy of this, they think my thoughts. I send my thoughts, I share my thoughts with them. So this is the skin of God. And I believe that paper, the Quran, divine texts, these are the skin of God. And I don't think we understand the Quran. I don't think the mullahs, the Taliban, even Assad is cruel what the Quran is telling them. They don't understand it. They don't understand classical Arabic. They don't understand the spirit in which it was written. So they can memorize the Quran by heart, but they're incapable of conceiving what divine mercy might be. What might divine mercy be? Let me ask you all, how often does a home heating system break down? I know this is a very strange question. How often do you think the heating system of a home would break down? How long would it take to break down? Give me an estimate. Anyone? 10 years. Anyone else? Now, the heating system is something that a human mind is designed, right? It was expressly designed by an intelligence to keep a home heated. Now look at the sun. It's millions of miles away. There's a very fine equilibrium that prevents this planet from being burned to a crisp or from freezing to death. If a human designed heating system lasts 10 years or 50 years or maybe 100 years if you're lucky, and yet this thing that we're to understand is just randomly burning in space millions of miles away, and yet it's worked for billions of years? How can that be? My own feeling is that someone is calibrating, and I think we should walk. When we walk on a sidewalk, just think of ourselves, we walk carelessly. We don't look at an ant that might be crossing our path, do we? We might step on that ant and squash it, just as we would squash anything. And there's trillions of ants on this planet, and it really doesn't matter if one or other dies. But in a cosmic sense, we're just an ant. We're just one more ant. And yet, deep down, we know the world was made for us. The universe bears us in its immensity, but we also, in our smallness, bear the universe. The Quran says that to kill a person, it is as if you killed all of humanity. And if you save a person, it is as if you saved all of humanity. What could that mean? What could that possibly mean? And so, my feeling is that I'm now quoting from paraphrasing a quotation of Hafiz. This is not really Hafiz, because many of you have read Hafiz and say, where did Hafiz say this? There's a translator named Daniel Ladinsky, and he translated Hafiz in his own way. He got from Hafiz what he wanted to understand. But this is what he said. Imagine if all these creatures on earth, imagine if they were all invited to a party. Imagine if God had invited them all to a party, all of you. You're all guests. You're all guests invited to a party. How would you treat these guests? You know, when I come here, I'm treated so well by Vincent, by Sarah, such kindness, like Mehman Nawazi. Imagine if we could think of all of creation, everything in creation as fellow guests. They're invited here just like us. A dog, a cat. Imagine if we were just all guests to one gigantic party. And that is, I think, what I would like is to share with you this thought as a gathering of friends, as a big party that we are all invited to.
Yes. There are several things you said I liked. I would at the same time want to send you a couple of challenges. regards to your reaction. But you said something with regards to we have to redefine what is sacred. I think that was beautiful. And the way I understand it was pretty much like Iqbal was saying, that the real sacred is really life itself. And that is the case, our lifestyle in modern times is the real sacrilege. And yet, the way you're speaking thereafter, it seems that you're reiterating the ancient mode, concept of what is sacred in terms of one being behind the order of the world. I can't reconcile these two viewpoints. That's why in the first question, and I'm going to throw my second question as well. It seems that you're putting a lot of responsibility on the capitalism, which is true, and yes, the head of capitalism seems to be responsible for a lot of moments that we are living through. Yet it seems that capitalism does not seem to be as monolithic as we like to portray an image of it. And I would like to know, I mean, in the 20th century have lived different economic systems and none of them seem to be better than any other. Yet I understand your criticism, but at the same time, so what would be your suggestion?
Look, I believe, for example, that an education, healthcare is a human right. If you're sick, you have the right to go to a doctor, regardless of your ability to pay. In that sense, I'm a socialist. I'm not against, for example, a person owning their own home or owning a business. But I believe that wealth should circulate like blood in the body. Just think about it. If blood clots in the body, it causes a heart attack. If it clots in the brain, if it clots in the heart, it causes stoppage. It destroys the body. It's the same thing with wealth and money. It should circulate freely. Right now, in the world, money is not circulating freely. It's becoming more and more concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. And there's a reason that's happening. It's capitalism. When you see tuition rising, when you see healthcare being privatized, when you see the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, it's because of capitalism. And I believe that you cannot reconcile the protection of nature, the sacred apprehension of nature with capitalism. They're mutually exclusive. In the United States, we've declared corporate personhood. That is to say, corporations are persons. They have the right to free speech. We cannot restrict their ability to spend money in elections. So they bribe politicians. It is a corrupt system. And ultimately, it is incompatible with sustainability. The temperatures have been rising steadily for the past several decades. And ultimately, I think that's going to lead to ecological havoc. We have to change the way we think, or we're going to perish. And I believe in a cooperative society. I believe in a society where sharing or self-sacrifice is paramount. But it will be necessary to transform the way we think. And I'm not sure whether religious is the right word, but a spiritual transformation of politics is necessary. Not one that is merely based in power relations. Not the kind of coercive socialism that we saw in the Soviet Union, which decoupled the sharing from the heart. I mean, if you go to the old Soviet Union, people became very materialistic under socialism, extremely materialistic and mercenary. They had a pent-up need for Coca-Cola and McDonald's, but these are invented needs. These are imposed needs. And I think what people really need is a sense of belonging, a sense of meaning, of love, and a sense of direction. And I don't think people have it today. I don't think people have that. Yes.
Thomas Paine, as I said, he named his two books Common Sense and The Age of Reason. Why didn't, in history, Age of Reason made it impact? What do you think? Will it in the future, by just reasoning?
People thought in the time of the Enlightenment that common sense and reason would prevail, that the oppression of women, and you also wrote about the oppression of women, the economic inequality, if you applied reason to life, you could make people see that there's no need for it, that we could lead better lives. But we're not reasonable. We're not governed by reason. We're greed, selfishness, self-interest. These are paramount. And religion is very often just a cloak for self-interest. That we guise, we veil, we cloak our own economic and political interests in divine rhetoric. You know that. Everywhere.
It sells.
Huh?
It sells.
It sells, right. Every single American politician talks about God. They talk about the United States as special, as exceptional, and exceptional in the eyes of God. And it's true of the president of Iran. He also talks about Iran, and he'll very loudly evoke the imams.
The Pope.
He does. The Pope. He also, and the Vatican is an institution of power. The reason priests can't marry is because of property rights. The church wanted to protect its property rights, and so they speak the language of power and self-interest, and they use religion for that. Reason exists still. It's still a powerful force, but people are basically irrational. Most people believe the strangest things. If you ask people what they believe, I mean, like a quarter of the American people believe that, would say that Obama's the Antichrist, or that nearly half of the American people believe, that, I don't know. People really believe the strangest things, but it doesn't mean that they're altogether irrational. People have areas, just we take an example. You go to an American hotel, you won't find the 13th floor. You go to 10, 11, 12, 14. Now there is a 13th floor, of course there is. You're being irrational, because the 14th floor is the 13th floor. It just doesn't say that. And yet, why is this? I consider myself a reasonable person, but I'm also superstitious. I do whatever my wife tells me. It's true. It's true. And I found out in life that when I don't do it, something goes wrong, invariably. No, I'm serious about this. For example, the door in my house has to be facing a certain direction and not facing another direction. And so, life is ultimately based on irrational drives and motivations, and true?
Don't you think that this spirituality will decrease the rationality of the human? I mean, lots of these superstitions has a root in spiritual beliefs.
I don't see a contradiction between reason and faith. I take certain things on faith, and yet I consider myself a reasonable person. I consider myself a Shia Muslim, but I drink. I have completely contradictory notions, and I can reconcile them. My mind. Have you noticed, like, for example, astronomers in the 19th century, they saw canals on Mars, because when they looked at Mars, these broken lines seen from afar, they become straight lines. So we're like that. Our mind reorders reality. And I think that we have irrational, reason is a word, right? It's a reason. There are certain things I like and certain things I don't like. Some of things are based on perfectly rational things. Some things are completely irrational. They don't have any, like, let me take it. You may take a dislike to someone, and you can't put it into words. You can't explain why you hate that person. You just can't stand them. Or you may like someone, and you can't explain it. Why is he your close friend? You can't explain it. And yet, you can also express in rational terms why you like or dislike someone, that same person. But they're not necessarily the same thing. You understand? There is a hidden dimension to ourselves. Like, let me give you an example. I have a waking existence. And in a few hours I will be asleep. You have no idea what I might be dreaming.
Yeah.
I'm someone else. I'm not the same person awake than when I'm asleep. I'm someone else. You are someone else. You are someone else. There are many dimensions. And at this moment, I am the dimension of, you just read my biography. When I heard you read my biography, it sounded like someone else. I'm Ali, and this is it was very strange for someone to read as, he did this, he did that, he's the director of publications. Because sometimes when you meet an old friend, you forget who you are. You're just an old friend. And so I think that these philosophers, and they're just old friends. Hafiz, Rumi, they're just old friends. You run into them, and reason, unreason, spirituality, religion, these are words. Truth, lies, these are all concepts that we play with. It's very difficult to define. I've learned to doubt my own certainties. Things I've been sure about turned out to be completely false. And the older I get, the less I know. The less I know, I'm convinced that it is better that way, to be always feeling that there's always something new to learn, something new to discover. What is it like being Persian in Montreal? I was wondering whether you could all tell me what it is like being at home and also afar. What is it like being an outcast and yet an insider here? I feel very much at home when I'm among Persian-speaking people. I don't know, I just feel a very strange sense of being back with my own friends and family. I don't know why it is. Like when I see a film by Majid Majidi, or I feel like I've suddenly seen my own world, my own people, even to the extent, I know I can't do this, but I even wanted to, even someone toyed with the idea of someday migrating to Iran and retiring there, even though I don't speak Persian, even though it's a bit of an outcast in a way, an outsider. So,
I wonder, continuing with the historical significance of things, if we could contextualize it, starting from Machiavelli and Loyola, and then Voltaire, and then perhaps even Jefferson, Washington, and so on.
Okay. Well, Machiavelli gave very sound advice to princes, and he really was not talking about right or wrong. He was not an immoral man. He understood what was right, but he understood that in order to do good, you have to be aware of the logic of this world. And I think Thomas Paine was also very much aware of the logic of this world. He was involved in politics, and strange as it may say, he wasn't an angel. At one point, he sided with the bankers of Philadelphia. So don't think that this man was a saint. No person can get involved in politics, can get involved in this world and remain pure and clean. So to live, to breathe, to exist is to be compromised in some sense. So I think that I don't think Paine and Machiavelli are incompatible, but Paine did talk about something that Machiavelli did not, which is that just how can we search for God? Where can we find God? And he said that it is in nature that God speaks to us. And by saying this, he laid the foundations for religious pluralism. Because if God speaks through nature, you can basically believe any religion you want. You can be a Muslim or Jew or Christian, Hindu or Buddhist, and still see God. There's no way you can impose any creed, any state religion. And I think Machiavelli would have agreed with that. I think Voltaire had a more visceral rejection of religion. He believed it was an obstacle to reason, that these are just blinkers, that it's an opiate, that it is something that might keep us in a kind of false sense of security and in some kind of illusion of happiness, but that it really deprives us of any deep understanding. I personally cannot accept this view. I don't believe that there's any necessary contradiction between being a Christian or a Jew or a Hindu or a Buddhist or Muslim and being a scientist. I think Einstein said that the purest, the deepest understanding of the universe brings a sense of awe that is akin to religion, that the sense of wonder, that this could have only, and this is not just an astronomer or a physicist who feels this way, a physician looking at what the human body is, the way it is self-regulating, the way it works, cannot help but believe in God. And when I say God, it's a word. I believe that deep down we believe despite ourselves. I can say I believe, I don't believe, and they would both be true. These both would be true. And yet I believe, too, that we've all experienced what ancient cultures have talked about. We've all experienced prophecy, for example. We've all foreseen the future. Every person I've ever met has said, I've experienced a moment of deja vu where I've said, I lived this moment before. This has already happened to me. And yet there's nothing in modern science that can explain that.
They do.
Huh?
They do.
They do. How do they explain it?
Actually, the way that you see something and process, because sometimes your eyes, your visual system is completely okay, no problem in it, but you can't see something is happening in your brain. So your visual system is like a machine like a camera or something, and your brain is like a processor of a computer. Sometimes this machine doesn't give the number 1, 2, 3, 5, 4, 5, 6, 7 pictures at the same time. Sometimes you get the picture number 7 first, and then get number 6. So in that case, number 6 for you is a deja vu. So that's something that they can make now with some electrode on your brain. You will have more deja vu. Or a spiritual feeling. Now they make a helmet that's called a God helmet. So when you put this helmet on your head, some signal will activate some part of your brain, and you feel that something is here now. So even an atheist or a believer, they both feel like that. So what I believe is that it seems that God is one step away from our knowledge. I mean, one day we had a God of rain.
That's a beautiful definition of God. It does have word.
So we had a God of rain, and then we find out how the rain is made, how it comes down. So then we said that, okay, this is the rain, so we have God of something else. And at the time being, for example, the déjà vu was something that we said, okay, that's the spirit of the person which is there. Or about something, the example that you came up with, that you see someone and you feel that you hate him, or you love him. And some people say that, okay, your spirit in the other world, you're close to each other. This is the simplest way of explaining something, because we all love stories. We like to hear the stories. And when you make things, instead of in formulas, you make them in a story, people like it more. That's why we have more religious people than people that want some formula about anything. Okay, this big person which can do everything and it's very wise, how does it itself come? We don't talk about it. It was there and it will be there from beginning to end. So when we talk about the story, people like to hear that, but when we try to come up with some ideas which is very difficult to talk about, then it's going to be difficult. So we still like to hear that, okay, someone made it. It's not, this is what I believe actually.
Interesting. I like it. I like the physiological basis for it. I believe we're all storytellers. Anyone who dreams is a storyteller. We're telling a story to ourselves. We're all filmmakers. By virtue of dreaming at night, we're filmmakers and storytellers. So I think that storytelling is integral to a person. We need to sleep. And we need to sleep not to rest. I mean, I can be on a sofa 24 hours, but I will feel sleepy at the end of those 24 hours. We need to dream. We find that when we don't dream, we're cranky. We're bothered the next day. There's a integral need to tell stories, to dream. That it is human to make myths, to find meaning. But I persist. I persist in believing, even though you're a scientist, and I am decidedly not, that mothers will know that their children are in pain 1,000 miles away. They know it at a certain moment. They will know. They'll call on the phone. They'll sense things. I believe this is possible. I can't explain it, but I have seen, and I have seen people who have gifts that I cannot explain. I've seen things that defy rational explanation. Maybe they have an explanation. Maybe this thing is one step away from me, which is why that I invested with the character of the Savior, with the character of God. Maybe it's my lack of understanding. But I can't help myself to invest it with God.
I only regret that I arrived late and I missed both the introduction and the beginning of your talk.
It's right here. Here's my talk. Here are my writings. You didn't miss much, but it's. I brought a lot of my literary articles. There's two sides of me. One is a political person. I'm like a brawler. Like the street people who fight with chains. The guys on motorcycles, you got them in Iran, the Basiji. So I'm like that. I'm a fighter. But the other side of me is a literary person, the poet. I'm a little bit of both. I have both in me. I like to fight for justice, for right things. So I brought both of my articles, some of my my writings on higher education. Back in the 90s, I was a fighter. Now, as I grow older, I'm more of a literary man. I write about literature, more softer things. And if any, my cards are here. I edit a journal. It's called Theory in Action. If anyone would like a copy of this journal, I have one. You can, if anyone's interested in writing for our journal, it's peer reviewed. It's an interdisciplinary journal. I invite you to, here's some copies if you'd like to take. And there's an interview of mine from this 2007 issue of Liberty Tree. There was a special issue on democracy and education. That's here. I wrote a lot on Mircea Eliade. Has anyone heard of him? He's a historian of religions. He wrote a lot, and he was interested in Eastern thought. And who was that? Mircea Eliade. Eliade was a Romanian writer. I've written on Borges. If anyone knows who Borges is. I'll tell you the story by Borges. Because it's a very simple story, and yet a very profound one. There was an old man. He was seated next to on a bench by the river. And as he was seated, a young man came and sat down by him. And he looked at the man and he was surprised. Because it was himself as he had been as a young man. Well, this is a man who's 69 years old, and he sees himself at 19, as he used to be, half a century earlier. And he's stunned. For a while, he just can't say anything. Then he says hello to the young man, and the young man, they start chatting. So he asks this young man where he's living, and he's living in the city where he used to live. He starts asking him questions about his family, his own family. So the old man starts asking him questions. Do you have these books in your room? And the young man says, yes. So as they talk, they realize that they're the same person. The young man realizes that this old man knows everything about him, that all he has been and all that he's going to become. And this old man realizes that this young man is himself as he had been many, many years ago. So they realize it's impossible, that they can't both be the same person and yet be in the same place. So they decide that they're going to meet the next day. They're going to come meet together at the same time and same place. And the next day, what do you think happened? Nobody came. Nobody came. And I thought to myself, why? Why didn't either of them turn up? And I thought to myself, this is my own answer. This is not what Borges says. Each of them wanted the other person to think that it was they existed. You're the one who exists. And I think that that is the closest we can come to being God in this world. To give existence, to give meaning to someone else. So this is the story. This is my article on The Other. And it's called The Overlooked Library in Borges' El Otro. If anyone's interested in reading that article, here it is. This is my writing. If there's anything, if you'd like to receive, I've written about maybe 40 or 50 articles. If anyone would like copies of them, you can get, I can mail them to you. A few of them are online. Here's my investigative journalism. Some of it is published in a book called Academic Repression. And I also, as I said, I'm an editor. So if you have your own writing, if there's anything you'd like to publish, if you have your own ideas, I'd be happy to publish it in English or French. Maybe even Farsi if I'm really daring and ready to keep my promise. Maybe I'll regret it. This is the brawler, this is the besieging. Here, you can see that. This too is the revolutionary. And this is the poet. Rumi, I quote him all the time. How many of you are fond of Rumi? All of you? Ah, what a stupid question. Actually, I who's not fond of Rumi?
That's it.
This is one of my favorite quotes. This is a quote from Rumi. I think I shared this with my friend Vincent and Sarah. There came one and knocked at the door of the beloved, and a voice answered and said, "Who's there?" The lover replied, "It is I." "Go away," returned the voice. "There's no room for you and me." Then came the lover a second time and knocked, and again the voice demanded, "Who is there?" The lover answered, "It is you." "Enter," said the voice, "for I am within." And this is another of my favorite quotes from Hafiz. "Pure eyes discern him like the crescent moon, but not all eyes have scope to see that splendor. Seize the chance offered by the drunkard's road, like the clue on the treasure track, not all can find it. Seize the chance offered by the drunkard's road." Well, that would get you in trouble in Iran. So, this is Eliade. If you really like Rumi and Hafiz, I think you'll like Eliade. And I brought all these things to share with you. This is a story. It's called The Divine Love of Hafiz and Pushkin, and Eliade is the captain's daughter. And here too I quote Hafiz a lot. These are all Hafiz quotes. One of my favorites here. Write all that worries you on a piece of parchment, offer it to God. And by the way, I don't follow this advice, but I should. Write all that worries you on a piece of parchment, offer it to God. Even from the distance of a millennium, I can lean the flame in my heart into your life and turn all that frightens you into holy incense ash. So this is Hafiz and Pushkin. So please, it was a pleasure talking to you all, meeting you, and inshallah we'll meet again someday in some other guise in some other place.